At 0300 on December 16, 1944, First Lieutenant Lyle Bouck crouched in his frozen foxhole on Lanzerath Ridge. The air was biting cold, and a heavy silence had fallen after the initial German artillery barrage rolled eastward. Below him, the snow-covered fields of Belgium lay deceptively peaceful. His 18-man intelligence and reconnaissance platoon was all that held this critical road junction. They were not front-line infantry, they were the eyes and ears of the 394th Regiment, meant to observe, not to stand and die. Yet orders were clear. Hold this position meant for an entire battalion. 20 years old, with only 3 months in combat, Bouck felt the crushing weight of command. He scanned the dark tree line of the Lossheimer Graben forest through his binoculars. Then he saw them. Shadows materialized into men, then into columns. Not a probing patrol, but a full battalion. 500 elite German paratroopers of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, moving with disciplined ease. Their objective, to blow open the Losheim Gap for the First SS Panzer Division, Hitler's spearhead. Bouck's mind raced through the math. 18 men, 1 30-caliber machine gun, a few bars, rifles, against 500. The nearest American unit was miles away at Buchholz Station. No reserves existed. They were alone. The paratroopers advanced in a column, confident, almost casual. German intelligence had dismissed the green American troops in this sector as weak-willed, likely to break at first contact. They expected to be at the Meuse River by nightfall. Bouck watched their advance, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had one card to play, a decision that had already broken the rules. 4 days earlier, he had traded captured German ID cards to the regimental supply officer, not for extra rations, but for a weapon, an armored jeep mounting a Browning M2 50-caliber heavy machine gun. It was an unorthodox, almost desperate move for a reconnaissance unit. Now that jeep was dug into the center of his shallow line, its massive barrel pointing down the slope. It was their only hope. As the first gray-clad figures began to emerge from the tree line into the open field, Bouck whispered orders down the line. Hold fire. Wait for my signal. The fate of the northern shoulder of the Allied front now rested on a handful of shivering scouts and an illegal machine gun. The Germans, completely unaware of the storm about to break, kept marching straight into the kill zone. The world exploded at 07:15. Bouck's command, fire, was swallowed by the deafening, ripping roar of the 50-caliber Browning M2. The gunner, a quiet man from Ohio who'd spent the night meticulously registering his fields of fire, worked the weapon with a surgeon's precision. At 75 yards, the heavy 12.7mm rounds did not merely hit, they eviscerated it. The first long burst scythed through the lead German squad. The snowy field, moments before a picture of orderly advance, transformed into a scene of chaotic horror. Paratroopers dove for cover that didn't exist. Simultaneously, a sharp, disciplined crackle of M1 Garands joined the orchestra of death. This was no volley fire of green infantry. Bouck's men were hand-picked marksmen, college boys turned soldiers through the Army Specialized Training Program. They aimed, breathed, and squeezed. A German fumbling with wire cutters would suddenly jerk and collapse. A radio man clutching his equipment would stumble and fall silent. The psychological shock was as potent as the physical damage. The Germans, expecting to scatter a nervous outpost, had instead walked into a meat grinder of pinpoint fire. The lead assault wave, shredded and disoriented, broke contact and pulled back into the tree line after just 8 brutal minutes. A surreal quiet descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded carried on the wind. Bouck,
Peering over the log reinforcement of his hole, counted 23 dark shapes littering the white snow between the fence and the forest. His men had not a single casualty, but as he caught the eye of his sergeant, he saw the same grim understanding. They had won the first round, but the mathematics remained. The M2's barrel was already hot to the touch, and every clip of M1 ammunition expended was irreplaceable. The Germans used the next half hour to regroup, their disbelief turning into a cold professional fury. At 07:45, the second assault began, this time with adapted tactics. While a main force advanced across the field, smaller, aggressive squads tried to infiltrate through the dense woods on both flanks of the ridge, hoping to outflank the thin American line. Bouck shifted his 2 Browning automatic rifle teams to cover the wooded approaches. The distinctive brrrp of the bars now echoed through the pines, a sharper counterpoint to the steady thump-thump-thump of the M2 engaging in the open. The Germans had also brought their own terrifying weapon to bear, the MG-42 machine gun. From the distant tree line, its characteristic high-rate buzz, the Hitler's bawsaw, sent streams of bullets whipping over the foxholes, forcing the Americans to keep their heads down. The 4 forward artillery observers with Bouck's platoon, men like Technical Sergeant Peter Gatke, desperately radioed for fire missions on the German assembly areas. The responses were always the same. All batteries were engaged across a crumbling 80-mile front. No help was coming. The platoon was an island, fighting its own private war. After 19 minutes of intense multi-directional fighting, the second German wave also receded, leaving more bodies in the snow. Yet Bouck's ammunition report was dire. Riflemen were down to half their clips. The M2 had burned through 200 of its 550-round crate. The gunner reported the barrel was nearing its heat limit. Scanning with his binoculars, Bouck saw the enemy massing not at 1, but 3 points around the base of the ridge. The next attack would be coordinated from all sides. He looked at his watch, then at his exhausted men. The real test was minutes away.
The lull was worse than the assault. For 37 minutes, an eerie quiet hung over Lanzerath Ridge, broken only by the moans of the wounded Germans in the field below, a sound that gnawed at the nerves of the young Americans. Bouck used the time not for rest, but for grim logistics. His platoon was down to less than half its rifle ammunition. The water-cooled jacket of the .30 caliber machine gun hissed with steam, a fragile shield against overheating. The prized 50 cal's barrel was a dull cherry red. The gunner could only fire 3 round bursts now, counting to seconds between to prevent a catastrophic cook-off. Through his binoculars, Bouck watched the Germans adapt with chilling efficiency. Officers gestured, pointing to the flanks. He saw the telltale setup of an 8-centimeter mortar team near the tree line. The Fallschirmjäger were no longer confronting a simple obstacle, they were methodically preparing to dismantle a fortified position. At 08:41, the third assault commenced, not as a wave, but as a coordinated pincer. The main force advanced across the field, but this time heavy and sustained fire from multiple MG-42 positions at the wood's edge pinned the Americans down. The sound was unmistakable, a ripping metallic buzz at 1,200 rounds per minute, chewing apart the frozen logs and kicking up geysers of snow and dirt around the foxholes. Under this suppressive blanket, flanking squads of paratroopers, armed with submachine guns and grenades, pushed aggressively through the dense woods on both sides. Bouck's world shrank to the roar of battle and shouted commands. Bar teams, watch the tree lines. Everyone else, pick your targets. In the woods on the eastern flank, Private First Class William James, a former forestry student, became the linchpin. His Browning automatic rifle grew scorching hot as he fired magazine after magazine into the shadows moving between the pines. The bar's 20-round magazines emptied in a heartbeat, forcing agonizingly frequent reloads. Beside him, his assistant gunner frantically fed fresh mags, his hands numb with cold and fear. A German potato masher grenade landed with a soft thump in the snow nearby. James scooped it up and hurled it back before it detonated in the enemy's ranks. On the opposite flank, the other bar team was locked in a desperate duel with a German machine gun nest that had crept too close. Meanwhile, the 50 caliber barked in short, authoritative bursts, each one meant to kill. It targeted the mortar team, silencing it after 3 rounds landed perilously close to the Jeep. The forward observer, technician 5th grade, Billy Queen, ignoring the bullet wound in his shoulder, crawled between holes to distribute the last of the rifle grenades. The battle became a series of isolated, savage fights for survival. By 9:17, the flank attacks had been bloodily repulsed, but the cost was written on the spent brass littering the frozen ground and in the haunted eyes of the men. At 09:30, Bew made another static-filled radio call. "Ammunition critical. Cannot hold another coordinated attack." The reply was a distant voice, almost lost in the ether. "Hold at all costs. No relief available." Bew looked at his men, boys from farms, shops, and colleges, now veterans etched with soot and resolve. They had just won again, but the German buzzsaw had taught them a new, terrifying lesson. The next attack would have no reprieve.
The third German assault dissolved at 9:43, leaving behind a scarred landscape of churned snow, spent brass, and bodies. 41 German dead or wounded were visible in the killing zone. Lieutenant Bou's men had achieved the impossible once more, but the victory was hollow, tasting of cordite and impending doom. As the adrenaline faded, the cold, hard facts settled in. A meticulous ammunition count revealed catastrophe. The platoon had fewer than 200 rifle rounds left in total. Some men had 5 rounds, others 15. The once deafening 50 caliber was now a silent, hulking monument of scorched metal, its ammunition boxes empty. The forward observers, men like Technical Sergeant Peter Gackey, had made their final, futile call for artillery. The response was a grim affirmation of their isolation. Every battery was committed. No fires could be spared for a single platoon. The Battle of the Bulge was a colossal event, and their desperate fight on Lanzerath Ridge was a tiny, ignored spark in the inferno. Bou looked at his watch. It was not yet 10 a.m. They had been fighting for over 3 hours. The German timetable for reaching the Meuse by nightfall was shattered here, on this insignificant hill, but the cost was their own annihilation. The illusion that reinforcements or artillery would save them had evaporated. The only remaining illusion was that they could survive the next attack. Through his binoculars, Bou observed the Germans with a clinician's cold eye. There was no panic or retreat in their movements. Instead, he saw the chilling efficiency of a veteran force adapting. Officers rallied troops, and fresh paratroopers from the regiment's reserves moved into position. This was no longer a probing action. It was a deliberate, grinding operation to obliterate a stubborn strongpoint. The Germans, having suffered nearly 100 casualties, now believed they were assaulting a fortified company, not a platoon. This misconception bought Bou precious minutes, but changed nothing fundamentally. He radioed regiment with his bleak status: virtually no ammunition, multiple wounded, no heavy weapons operational. The order was unchanged: hold position, do not withdraw. The meaning was clear: your mission is to die in place. Bou gathered his men, their breath forming plumes in the freezing air. He didn't offer false hope. He told them the truth. No help was coming, ammo was almost gone, and the Germans were regrouping for another push. Their job was to delay, to make every second and every last bullet count. As the men checked their weapons, fixing bayonets with numb fingers, a shared, silent understanding passed between them. They had already done more than anyone could have asked. The coming fight would not be about victory, but about time and honor. At the bottom of the ridge, over 400 fresh Fallschirmjäger prepared for a fourth assault. On the ridge, 22 Americans prepared to meet them with a handful of bullets and steel. The fourth assault came at 10:17, not with the cautious probes of before, but with the brutal finality of a hammer blow.
The German commander, enraged by the costly delays, committed his entire remaining force in a single concentrated wave. Nearly 400 paratroopers advanced shoulder to shoulder across the width of the ridge, a gray tide moving through the smoke of their own grenades. Their doctrine was simple: punct concentration, overwhelmed with sheer mass. The silent 50 caliber offered no deterrent. Buell's men, distributing their last 73 rifle rounds with grim economy, held their fire until the range closed to 100, then 60 yards. The crack of the M1 Garands became sporadic, each shot deliberate and fatal. A German carrying wire cutters would fall. A squad leader urging his men forward would collapse. But the arithmetic was relentless: 73 bullets against 400 men. The Germans, sensing the weakening fire, pushed forward with renewed fury, finally breaching the shot-up barbed wire in multiple places. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Buell, his own M1 now empty, shouted for his men to fix bayonets. The metallic snick of blades locking onto barrels was a sound from another era of war, a final, desperate admission. In foxholes, soldiers clutched their last grenades or hefted entrenching tools like clubs. The end came not with a dramatic explosion, but with an eerie, creeping silence. One by one, the American rifles fell silent as their final rounds were expended. The distinct ping of an empty M1 clip echoed, unanswered by a follow-up shot. By 13:14, only scattered single shots rang out. German officers, recognizing the collapse of sustained fire, ordered the final rush. At 13:20, over 50 Fallschirmjäger rose from the snow and charged the last yards into the American positions. The defense dissolved into a savage, intimate struggle. Grenades were thrown at point-blank range. Private First Class William James used his rifle as a club until a German soldier wrestled it away. Another defender fought with a trench knife, his foxhole a whirl of kicking snow and grimacing faces. Seeing his men being overwhelmed, wounded, and with no means to continue a meaningful fight, Lieutenant Buell made the hardest decision of his life. To save the lives of the soldiers who had already given everything, he gave the order to cease resistance. At approximately 13:32, the surviving Americans raised their hands. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge was over after nearly 8 hours. A German sergeant, stepping over the silent 50 caliber jeep, stared in disbelief at the handful of captured men. "Where are the others? Where are the machine guns?" he demanded. Buell simply gestured to his exhausted platoon. The German refused to believe that this small, battered group and a single heavy weapon had caused such carnage and cost his battalion 16 hours of irreplaceable time. The German paratroopers swarmed over the ridge, their weapons trained on the exhausted Americans. The fight was out of Bouck's men. They stood slowly from their foxholes, hands raised, some leaning on comrades for support. The scene that greeted the victorious Fallschirmjäger was one of profound confusion. Instead of a reinforced company position they expected, with multiple machine gun nests and ample reserves, they found only a thin line of chamois holes, one silent jeep-mounted 50 cal, and fewer than 24 ragged defenders. A German sergeant, examining the still-smoking M2, turned to Bouck in disbelief. "Where are the others? Where are your heavy weapons?" Bouck, his face smudged with powder and frost, replied simply, "This is it. This is all of us." The German shook his head, refusing to accept that such devastating resistance could come from so few. The cost was laid bare across the snowy slope. 92 German casualties against 1 American killed and 14 wounded. The German battalion commander, arriving at the scene, acted with professional respect. He ordered immediate medical care for all wounded, American and German alike. As his men were treated, Bouck saw the German officers urgently consulting maps. Their timetable was in tatters. The vital road junction was finally open, but the assault had consumed the entire morning and severely bloodied the regiment tasked with clearing the path. The strategic impact of those 8 hours was immediate and immense. The spearhead of the entire northern German offensive, the First SS Panzer Division, led by Jochen Peiper, was idling in traffic miles behind, waiting for the road through Lanzerath to be declared safe. The 9th Fallschirmjäger, shocked by their losses and convinced more Americans lurked in the woods beyond, proceeded with extreme caution, conducting slow, deliberate searches instead of a rapid advance. Piper's elite armored column did not arrive at the crossroads until nearly midnight, a catastrophic 16-hour delay. This bottleneck at the very start of the operation robbed the German offensive of its vital momentum in the north. For Bouck and his men, however, there was no awareness of this strategic triumph. As they were marched into captivity that afternoon, they felt only the bitter sting of defeat and failure. They had been captured, their position lost. The freezing march to the rear, past columns of fresh German troops in armor now streaming through the gap they had so long blocked, was a cruel procession. They believed they had simply been overrun. The true war-altering consequence of their stand, that they had inadvertently helped cripple Hitler's most critical offensive on its very first day, was knowledge that would be denied to them for decades. The reality of captivity was a new kind of battle, fought against hunger, cold, and despair. Bouck and his men were packed into a freezing boxcar at the rail yard in St. Vith, 72 men in a space meant for 40. For days, the train crept eastward into Germany without food or water. The temperature plunged. By Christmas Day, 7 Americans in their car had died from wounds or exposure. Their destination was Stalag 9-B, a notorious prisoner of war camp. The conditions were brutal. Thin soup once a day, relentless cold, and the creeping spread of dysentery and pneumonia. As the Third Reich crumbled in the spring of 1945, rations dwindled to near nothing. Guards grew increasingly hostile. Bouck, who had weighed 165 pounds on December 16th, wasted away to a skeletal 112 pounds. When American forces finally liberated the camp in April, the men of the platoon were mere shadows, their bodies broken, but their bond unshaken. They returned to the United States as the war ended, scattering to their homes across the country. Yet they carried a heavy, private burden, the conviction that they had failed. In their minds, they were the unit that had been overrun and captured. The myth of the lost platoon was born not from heroism, but from shame. They spoke to no one about Lanzerath, burying the memory deep, a painful secret from a war everyone wanted to forget. For nearly 2 decades, the stand at Lanzerath Ridge remained a forgotten footnote. The epic narratives of the Bulge focused on Bastogne, the Malmedy massacre, or the heroism of larger units. The official U.S. Army history of the campaign, the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge by Hugh Cole, mentioned Bouck's platoon in only a single brief paragraph. It was this scant mention that fatefully reached one of the platoon's own, Private First Class William James. Living with constant pain from his wounds, James was incensed by the historical oversight. He tracked down his old lieutenant and ignited a spark in Bouck. The former commander, who had carried the guilt of surrender for 20 years, realized his duty was not over. He had to fight one last campaign, the battle for memory. Bouck began the painstaking work of gathering statements, tracking down his scattered men, and petitioning the military bureaucracy. He faced a wall of official indifference. The records were sparse. The witnesses were aging and scattered. The U.S. Army saw no reason to re-examine a small-scale action from a war long past. To the world, the story of 18 men holding off 500 for 8 hours seemed like an exaggeration, a tall tale from a lost campaign. The truth was slipping into oblivion, and with it, the chance for his men to find peace.
Lieutenant Bouck's campaign for his men became his new mission, a decades-long battle against bureaucratic inertia and fading memory. He wrote countless letters,
petitioned congressmen, and gathered sworn affidavits from every surviving platoon member. The breakthrough came when military historians, piecing together both American and German records, uncovered the full strategic impact of the 8-hour delay. The story gained traction, championed by authors like John Eisenhower in The Bitter Woods and journalist Jack Anderson, who brought national attention to the forgotten platoon. The U.S. Army, confronted with overwhelming evidence from both sides of the battle, launched a formal review. The investigation confirmed the extraordinary facts. An 18-man platoon had indeed stopped a battalion, inflicted a 10-to-1 casualty ratio, and, most crucially, derailed the timetable of the entire 1st SS Panzer Division on the offensive's first day. The delay at Lanzerath was recognized as a pivotal, cascading failure in the German plan. On October 26, 1981, nearly 37 years after the battle, the United States Army formally rectified its oversight in a full military ceremony at the Pentagon. The awards presentation was a moment of profound and bittersweet closure. Lieutenant Lyle Bouck, the correct spelling of his name, and Sergeant William Slate were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. In total, every member of the platoon was decorated, making it the most highly decorated American unit of its size in World War II. 4 Distinguished Service Crosses, 5 Silver Stars, and numerous Bronze Stars with the V device were awarded. The entire unit received the Presidential Unit Citation. As the old soldiers, now graying and bent, stood to receive their long overdue honors, the weight of a lifetime lifted. The shame of surrender was finally replaced by the understanding of their monumental contribution. They had not failed, they had succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. William James, whose anger had sparked the quest for justice, had passed away in 1977 after 37 surgeries, but his family was there in his stead. Bouck, looking at his men, understood that the final battle was won. The truth had been rescued from oblivion, ensuring that the story of their impossible stand on a frozen ridge in Belgium would, at last, be remembered not as a footnote, but as a legend.